A driver of international aircrew who was reportedly unvaccinated and unmasked is at the centre of the New South Wales outbreak. The government's hand-picked advisor, Jane Halton, says she warned the government last year that transport arrangements were, quote, a potential hole and had to be a high priority. Why did the Prime Minister ignore that advice, and does he now take any responsibility for the Sydney outbreak?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, as the member would be well aware, the vaccination of those workers in quarantine is the responsibility of state governments. And what we're seeing again from the opposition, Mr Speaker, is a deliberate attempt to try and politicise this terrible outbreak in Sydney.
Members on my left.
As a Sydney-sider, Mr Speaker, I'm not going to have the Labor Party add to the hardship faced by Sydney-siders by seeking to politicise what they're having to go through now. There are responsibilities that are held at a Commonwealth level and at a state level, Mr Speaker. And as the Premier has said this morning in New South Wales, the investigation into that transport worker who should have been vaccinated, the doses were available, Mr Speaker, and in this case that worker was not vaccinated, and the New South Wales Premier has made it very clear that they're investigating into how that occurred. So, Mr Speaker, I would encourage the opposition, rather than to seek political point scoring in the middle of a pandemic, to grow up, Mr Speaker, and focus on supporting the government as we seek to take Australia through this pandemic. Australians do not need the bickering from the opposition, Mr Speaker. They need a constructive opposition which will support the government as we continue to lead Australia through this crisis.
The member for Dawson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on the work the Morrison-Joyce government is taking to protect the lives and livelihoods of regional Australians?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the member for Dawson for his question and note the splendid work that he has done in so many things, such as the Mackay Ring Road, and also how he has been a great champion for the farmers. For farmers, especially the cane farmers.
Member for Isaacs.
And we want to make sure, I'm doing everything I can to make sure the member of Dawson remains the member of Dawson after the next election because of the advocacy that he has done. Now, the member for Dawson asks the question about the update of the House on the work of the Morrison-Joyce government. The ultimate goal of any process, especially in dealing with COVID, is to make sure that we get the vaccination out. But the purpose of getting the vaccination out is to make sure that people don't die. That is the ultimate goal. And that ultimate goal in our nation has been exceptional. We have had no deaths through community contact this year. We've had one tragic death from a person who's come in from overseas. Now, that is not the case in other parts of the world. We've had 2 million deaths overseas. Each one of those 2 million as tragic as the other. The purpose that we have taken in this nation at both the Commonwealth level and at a state level is to work on policy commitments that keep the Australian people safe, and a process of keeping them safe. And I'd have to say that Australia has been more successful this year than any other nation on earth because we have had no community deaths. And that is the ultimate test. And when you look at it, you can go to our regional towns. If you go to the regional town of Wagga, they've had no deaths this year. And I don't know even whether they've got a case in Wagga at the moment. If you go to Shepparton, they've had no deaths this year. I don't even know whether they've got a case in Shepparton. If you go to Gladstone, they've had no deaths this year. I don't even know whether they've got a case in Gladstone. We have no cases in Tamworth. We've had no deaths this year. And that is the ultimate success, the ultimate test of success of the government, that the Prime Minister, that myself, that each member of this parliament can go back to their communities and say that the Australian people have been kept safe. They've been kept safe through the diligent actions of the Commonwealth and assisted by the states in making sure that we keep the Australian people in a place that makes us the envy of the world. As I conclude, the final judgment on anything, the rollout is so vitally important, but there is one thing more important than that. that we have kept Australians alive.